Hi, Ashutosh. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Pleasure. Stephen is the chairman of Reds Capital. He's the founder of AI for Good. He's been a chairman, founder, has had board roles in business and startups, successful entrepreneurship, investments, venture capital. He's an investor. He was the most valuable person in AI. He's a futurist and he's an author. He's been recognized and awarded globally for over 300 recognitions for disruptive innovation, futuristic investment, successful entrepreneurship, and global technology leadership. And most importantly, he chairs the YPO EIS, of which I'm a part of. So, Stephen, what would you say are three key milestones in your life or your career?
Ashutosh, that's a great question because I've had a lot of sort of events and inflection points in my life. But, when I think about it, probably, when I was really young, let's say about 3 years old, I was discovering the world through the many encyclopedias my family possessed. And they had about 5 different kinds of encyclopedias. And that led me to exploring science. So again, when I was about 5, and I built a computer when I was 10.
Wow.
And that led me to doing continuing innovation.
Okay.
So would be sort of my early inflection point.
Okay.
My next one was when I decided to go into teaching. So I had some early success and I thought, you know what, I want to give back. So I'm going to spend my time teaching. So I taught from my 20s and into when I was 50. And that's probably sort of a really passionate, enjoyable point in my life of just guiding people, helping them, supporting them attain their vision, their goals and their dreams. But, my family sort of said, Steve, maybe you should go back to some of your early roots in innovation.
Okay.
And even though when I was teaching, I was still speaking and doing some innovation. After 5 years, I said, okay, I will. And so I decided to leave teaching to focus on global good. So those are kind of the 3 buckets in my life.
Wow, that's amazing. So let's talk about Reds Capital. Tell me about what you do at Reds Capital.
It's kind of it's sort of the role I have. You really do a little bit of everything. Okay. So because I'm engaged in so many global communities, I'm always curating deal flow and looking at those that are really sort of globally transformational. So that's a lot of my time. I also look at the future. I'm always thinking about the future, about innovation and investments. And then the third sort of bucket is thinking about our portfolios and how I can help them solve grand problems through our networks. Okay. So I would say that's how I divide my time with Reds Capital.
Okay. And is Reds Capital one of the components of Reds Capital a very large fund also?
We deploy capital in different ways. So we have the ability to co-invest. And my partners are amazing. If the audience ever gets a chance to look at my partners, they're just in themselves leaders in their own right within the different regions that they exist in and so on. Okay. And then, of course, we have the ability to invest from our fund. Where our investment thesis is very early. So we're really trying to look at maybe ones that we can capture early, help to guide them, and we always look for things that are transformational, that we think will have some kind of major global impact. And that's kind of our investment thesis. So it works well for us and we enjoy doing this
Fantastic. Work. Fantastic. And when you get in with an investment, are you long-term investors or do you, wait for the market to turn and exit?
We're not what you would call a financial investor. So we're definitely more of a long-term strategic investor, and that is we try to engage as much as we can to help support our startups, and we look for the longer term rather than the short-term gain.
Let's talk a little bit about startups. You do invest in startups as well. And a very large number of people who will listen to us and listen to all your words of advice and wisdom are startup entrepreneurs. My first question to you is that based on all the experience that you have, what are some of the basic mistakes a lot of startup entrepreneurs tend to make?
That's a good question. And so let me step back a moment. And I recommend that people who are sort of entrepreneurial, maybe very young, and thinking, "Hey, I want to do a startup." You should get some guidance. Like I recommend Steve Blank and all of the material that he's written, the books that he's written. This material is a little bit old now, but there used to be a group called Startup Genome. They still exist in different ways, and they produced some reports that were available freely, and they talk about what makes for a startup, what kind of attributes startup people should have, what sort of signs should you look up to see if you could do a startup. And then, I recommend you look at things like CB Insights. They provide a lot of free information. And of course, you can also register for CB Insights, and PitchBook is another one. And then also join investment communities or organizations so that you can network. So now, what are the things that create problems for people who do a startup? Well, I would say, when they don't follow some kind of process. So, in other words, they should have some sort of plan, and a plan they can use is like Alexander Osterwalder's business model canvas, which gets you to kind of bucket things like, what are your key priorities? Who do you think your partners are going to be? What are the major sort of markets or channels that you can have, and so on. That's kind of very early. You should have some kind of structure what you're trying to do. And then, of course, you need to then think, hey, is there a real problem out there? And do I have a solution? And then you should validate it. So just don't guess. Right? So a lot of entrepreneurs think, hey, I got a solution, and it happens to be a non-existent problem, except for maybe a small little niche. There's just no way they're going to scale. So you definitely have to make sure it's a problem that's recognized, and you have a solution that's recognized, even if you haven't developed it. And you have to test the idea with different communities to make sure that it's real. And sometimes when you test an idea, you just can't go to family and say, hey, I got this great idea, because family often will say, yeah, that's a great idea, because they don't want to hurt your feelings, right?
Very interesting. Very
so you really want to get a lot of validation. So and go through that competitive analysis. And a lot of people, when they're entrepreneurs, they don't really think about, well, gee, have I done some desk research? Is there other people out there that are doing what I'm trying to do?
Correct.
And so if you got a crowded marketplace, unless you can do it better in some way, then, it's a non-starter. So, those are some of the early things. And then, of course, what you want to do then is you want to make sure that, you got some validation, there's a real problem, you got some validation that you got a real solution, you've done some competitive analysis, you've done some planning and how you're going to structure this thing. What some people do too is they'll even start trying to raise money without an MVP, that's called a minimal viable product. So, build something really light, and again, see if it validates, and validates by, you got a problem, you got a solution, you built something, and then test it. Is there a product market fit? Again, a lot of entrepreneurs don't go this process of actually seeing if there's a real product, they have a real product, they have a real market, and there's validation or proof. In fact, one of the best ways to prove it is, people pay a little bit, even for your MVP or to get the next iteration of your MVP. It means a lot more than people just giving you kind of surface yes or no. And then, of course, you then go through revenue model validation, make sure you got paying customers and things like that, where potentially revenues will exceed your costs. Then you can go to a more high fidelity minimum viable product or a proof point. You look for value delivery validation, like real proof that you're delivering real value, you can make a profit, and then seeing real smart business metrics. So those are some of the steps that you should think about before you do a startup. And then, why do startups fail? Why do entrepreneurs there's no market need, they run out of cash, they're not the right team, they get outcompeted, price cost issues, poor product, lack of business model, poor marketing, ignoring the customers, product mistimed, they lose focus, there's disharmony, a pivot is mean you change direction, it's gone bad, you don't really have the proper passion, the grit required to do this is just kind of like an idea. bad location, no investor engine burnout, etc. So there's a lot of things to think about. So, I gave you like a floodgate of information.
I can see that.
What can you do? Go to CB Insights, and they actually have done a study of hundreds of startups that have failed, and then they categorized why they've done it. Wow. So do some homework, and then before you do a startup, think, consider the things of why other startups fail. And then think of these sort of processes and steps before you do a startup. And often I get approached by people and say, hey, I've got this great idea. Will you fund me? I said, okay, let's step back a moment here. That's just an idea. Do you realize if you work it out, there's probably 6 trillion ideas being generated every day.
Wow.
And there's a lot of difference, a big gap between an idea and actually executing and making it into something real, right?
Correct. Well said. And therefore, a follow-up question, since you are the person who sits with the checkbook, and I've often been asked this question, should I bootstrap my startup as long as I can, or should I pick up as much money that is available to me? What are your thoughts?
That's a great question, and it gets into this idea of premature scaling. So I talked about this group called Startup Genome many years ago. They put out some reports, and there's one called Premature Scaling, and Steve Blank talks about it in his work. Premature scaling is meaning you're going too fast without going through those sort of 9 levels that I talked about earlier, like business model canvas, problem solution, is there competitive analysis, an MVP, are you doing product market fit, is there revenue validation, et cetera, et cetera. So the key is that, you've got to go through all of these steps and so on, and to write a check, if you seek money too fast, then you may do things like premature scale. You hire too many people before you're ready, so you're really burning, you're wasting the money. You're trying to go to a high fidelity MVP before you even done a product market fit, before you even done some revenue validation, even before a problem solution validation and so on. So if you get money too early, you got to be really, really careful.
Correct.
And because you can get sloppy and you can prematurely scale. Hire too many people, give yourselves all a big title, and pay yourself too much. Just do it off your side of your desk on the weekends, and so you're not fully committed. You really don't have any skin in the game. I really recommend that you should show that you're passionate, you really are involved, you've done your homework, you looked at all of the sort of essential components for a startup. So no, I think you should try to bootstrap as long as you can, and then only take an investment when you really, really do need it. But you could start planning for it and maybe doing some initial sort of outreach, but I think you get sloppy if you get too much too early.
Amazing. That's such incredible advice. So let me move to the next component of our conversation. You sit on so many boards, and I know, for example, in the country that I'm in India, the fiduciary responsibility of a non-executive director is equal to that of an executive director. My question to you is, as a non-executive board member, what do you look for before you accept a board position?
I like to reframe that question to maybe organizations, because I sit across so many different kinds of groups as a board member. So the first thing I look for is, look, if you're going to sit or take on a board position for any organization, you better make sure that you believe in that organization, right? And so I always, myself personally, I want to make sure that that organization aligns with my core values, my core goals in some way. And one of my core values is smart execution for global good. And what I mean by smart is there's, a specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound on a continuing basis for global good. And there's metrics for that, and it aligns with my core values. And then the second item is, is that organization, do they have sort of a basis in trust and integrity, transparency, and so on? And then, can I make a meaningful contribution? I just don't want to sit on a board just to take up a seat on a board. I want to make sure that I can meaningfully contribute to the success of that organization by injecting maybe a diverse viewpoint, or in some way not just add to the group think. Otherwise, to me personally, it's a waste of time.
Wonderful. So, Stephen, you're the founder of AI for Good. For all our viewers and listeners, tell us, what is AI for Good?
You know, AI for Good is a solution-focused movement, summit, and programs where it's looking at the application of AI and their solutions that always align for the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Yeah, and you can look this up on the internet. These came out in 2015. And today, it's become the most successful summit and movement. In fact, that term, AI for Good, has been adopted by governments around the world, by corporations. For example, they have AI for Good programs. By academic institutions like Mila out of Montreal, they have an AI for Good program. So academic groups, media, and so forth. The UN agencies, almost all of them have adopted, in fact, over 38, and so on. So you see this broad sort of adoption across the board, but it's really saying, let's look at AI, let's look at the ethical applications of it, and make sure it aligns for the positive benefit of the planet by aligning with the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay. And how does a common individual get associated with AI for Good?
You know, AI for Good, if you can just look it up on the internet, make sure it's tied to the UN agency ITU, because there's now, you can get confused, right? Because it's, we put it into the public domain somewhat. So make sure it's tied to the United Nations ITU, the International Telecommunications Union. So just do a search on ITU AI for Good, and there's a means where you can join the platform in some way. If you're an entrepreneur, there's an open innovation factory where you can get mentorship and have your startup be judged and so on, and get spotlighted. You can contribute to focus groups. So a focus group is almost like a working group, working on a real solution to the application of AI. For example, there's one in healthcare. There's one in the use of data. There's another one, a new one in disaster management. There's another one, autonomous vehicles, etc. And you can join. They're open platforms where you can contribute your talent and your expertise.
Terrific. So, Stephen, I'm going to now move to the last segment of our conversation, which is some questions for you personally. You know, first for an individual who does so many diverse things and associated with so many organizations, and from whatever I know of you, you're constantly giving back. What are some of the core values you believe in?
You know, that's a great question. So core values to me are things like helping others, transparency, taking time to understand the other, understand other people's points of view, and being very accepting of diversity and integrity. So these are kind of my core values.
Okay. And as you look back at a life well led, multiple of successes, where you stand today, what does success mean to Stephen?
To me personally, helping others and in some way impacting the world in a positive way.
Okay. And a follow-up question to that, who or what inspires you?
You know, it's interesting. Any challenge or opportunity that I see in the world that's diverse and which adds to my understanding, that's inspiring for me. So, you have to be receptive to that. So I'm inspired by every person I meet. I'm inspired by hearing their narrative and their story and understanding and learning from them, their trials and tribulations, their successes and challenges, and how they met them and grew from it. And then that makes me grow. And for example, Ashutosh, we had a great conversation. I learned a lot from you because you shared so much about your marvelous experiences. So.
Thank you. Thank you. My next question to you, Stephen, is on failure. You know, and I've often said this, that from the part of the world that I come from, parents don't teach children it's okay to fail. You know, we're constantly being told you've got to come first, be head of the line, etc., etc., and that probably manifests itself in our behavior patterns. And yet we fail and we learn and we move on. So my question to you is, what have been some of your learnings from some of your mistakes?
The interesting thing is I don't view life as failure or mistakes. I always view life as opportunities for growth. So, and what some people would consider maybe a mistake or failure, I feel that's the biggest opportunity for the biggest growth, because it's going to stretch you as long as you take the time to understand it. And drill in and to learn from that experience. So I really see life as a series of continuing challenges of growth opportunities. And I'm an optimist as well. So.
Okay. So I have time for two more questions for you. My next question is that, technology, giving back, large social sector projects. How do you want the world to remember you?
I want the world to remember me by maybe one word: helping. I want to be identified as I helped. So,
okay. That's a great way to be remembered. My last question to you is, you're obviously an absolutely incredible multitasker, and I've seen you at work doing incredible stuff. How do you handle so many different roles?
I get asked that question a lot. Like, how is it possible that, I work on many different problems? Well, one thing is, I believe in this idea of grit, Angela Duckworth's sort of definition of grit, and that's sort of like skill plus hyper effort makes talent, and then talent plus, or I should say talent plus hyper effort makes skill, skill plus hyper effort makes achievement, but achievement with passion and commitment and optimism, and again, work creates success. So passion drives me, and then that drives me to put in time and commitment. But there's something else, and I found it in my family. My family has the ability to work endless hours. My mother has, my grandmother has it, my sister has it, and so on. So I think it's probably a gene. There's a gene called ADRB1 or DEC2 that allows you to work pretty well endlessly. So I see a week as 168 hours available. So that's kind of one part. The other part, the reason I can do a lot is, there's a law called Metcalfe's law, which means the value of something is proportional to the number of connected users. Well, in my case, it's relationships. So in my life, I find that the more I do, in a way, it actually makes things more efficient because I can see commonality, I can see how things relate to each other, and therefore I can see solutions faster and execute faster and opportunities and challenges. So in a way, being busier makes you more efficient.
Correct. That is one thing I fully agree with you. Stephen, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure and such an honor talking to you. I wish you lots of success with everything that you're doing.
Ashutosh, thank you for inviting me. I truly enjoy this, and also all the marvelous work that you're doing. Congratulations on your tremendous history of success and for giving and helping others.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.